Hi guys, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Tonight's session is on color and astro images, and I am going to be presenting that. But before we get into that, as always, we have our image of the week, and this week's image of the week goes to Sean Harrison. And Sean is in the room, and he's going to give us a little rundown of this image. He was we took him off, we hit him off guard because he didn't know that he won with this image. This DSLR image. But Sean, if you have a few minutes, go right ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was about 4 hours of hydrogen alpha through a 12 nanometer filter with a modified Canon XS DSLR, and about an hour, I think it was like an hour and a half of RGB color. And being new to PicsInsight, I tried every combination of color and hydrogen alpha blending, and this was one of the odd mixtures, but I kind of liked it. The colors came out very strange. It's pretty unorthodox as far as the blending of the hydrogen alpha goes, because the color has no hydrogen alpha in it, so it was only used as the luminance. And I played with the blending. I split the RGB into its separate color channels, and then played with the mixture of the different colors, and it came out a little unorthodox. And then I eventually tried to blend in regular RGB stars with it. They came out a little bit green, but I kind of like the odd color mixture that was the result of it. I'm a big fan of unorthodox color and astro images, as long as you don't have green stars or something. Anyway, so that's about it.
Thanks, Sean. And now you just got a CCD, and this was also your first target, correct?
Yeah, as a test. It didn't come out quite as well as this, but yeah, now I have cooled CCD thanks to Josh. He was the one that brokered the whole deal, so it wouldn't have happened without him. Thanks, man.
Very nice. All right, well, we're going to jump right over to the presentation. Let me take my screen back and make that window bigger. Bear with me for 1 sec. And can you guys see my presentation screen?
Yes.
Thank you. So the presentation's on color and astro images. And previously, Alex had done a presentation on, I believe it was the 5 C's of astrophotography, and he kind of tried to break it down into simple, digestible bits. And it was a great presentation. You should probably go back and watch it. But it's funny how certain aspects of our images really are important, really sometimes do take precedent. And I think color is one of those things where you can really make the image dramatic. Now, one of those interesting things about astro images is that, and before I start, I'm going to jump into my image, and I had just finished this image. I'm really happy with this image. This is something that I've been working on for the last week, and finally got it out. Now Josh and I are collaborating on a version of it. He happened to be shooting it at the same time. And this particular nebula, I've seen photographed a few times. It's fairly dim, and I've seen lots of great shots of it. And I knew I wanted to shoot it. So I started shooting it, and I noticed just this little red streak going through the background. And I didn't realize at the time, but then Josh mentioned that there is H alpha going behind the nebula, or a band going behind the nebula. And you know, in our images, H alpha shows up as red, and you're used to seeing these dark nebula, the reflection nebulas, as mostly dust and sometimes glowing a little bit of blue. So the idea of combining that red, that blue reflection nebula sitting in front of that H alpha nebula just really appealed to me. And I had to shoot it, and I gave it a lot of time. I had Well, I was out 5 days this past week. 4 of them were clear. One of them I was just kind of up waiting for it to get clear, and it never did. You guys know the story. But I finally got the data that I needed. Could probably use a little bit more, but really happy with this image. But it goes to show you that when you look at this image, there's lots of different aspects. There's the reds, the blues, the stars have their own color, the distribution. And all that together is really what makes a dramatic image. Now, I'll qualify this by saying sometimes the images that I get really excited about are the most boring images to either probably the Astro bin people or the Cloudy Nights people, but more frequently to my parents or to my friends. They like seeing the Orion Nebula. I'm the one that knows how difficult this is to do, so I like doing difficult targets, but I think other astrophotographers will look at this and say, wow, that's cool, I like that. There's lots of stuff going on. So, moving on. We are, for better or worse, and I hope you don't take this as a negative, but we are really in the business of pretty pictures. We want to make stuff look good. We want, I've actually heard other people say this, and this is exactly how I feel. I like exercising my creative side with astrophotography. I can't paint, I can't draw, I'm terrible with perspective, but I'm pretty good at setting up a telescope and getting it to point at a pretty tight spot in the sky for a long time. And then I'm getting pretty good at processing with the help of a bunch of people here. But we are in the business of pretty pictures. That said, there's kind of a few rules we try and follow. We color calibrate our images to give an accurate representation of color. I'm going to go into a bit of that in a little bit. But after we've color calibrated, we use saturation to emphasize that color. At the same time, we're using nonlinear stretches. We're boosting brighter regions. We're trying not to boost the stars. We might be darkening the dimmer regions. We want to emphasize brightness levels and add contrast. And we take artistic license in how we apply each of them. Before we went live, Josh was commenting on my image and how much different it looks than the rendition he did. And that's awesome. That's why this is such a cool hobby. We're working off the same data. He hasn't actually seen my collaboration data, but it has a very similar look to my data. And that's just the way we process it. Color is very important. I've already said that. Many times when you're looking at an image, and I'm giving you some backstory first, so many times when you look at an image, it's like this. It's going to be an RGB image, probably telling you stuff you've heard before if you're here, but for some of our beginners, you're looking at an RGB image. An RGB image uses filters of green, red, and blue. In a DSLR camera, it still has those filters. They're just over the pixels. With an RGB, you're aiming for the most accurate color representation. Most DSLR cameras are designed to give you an accurate color representation. When we create an image, we will require color calibration to balance the colors. DSLRs have white balancing to help you do that. CCDs, you actually balance the colors in other ways. But RGB is a bit susceptible to light pollution. And at the same time, with RGB, you get great colors, but you work really hard for those colors. I'm not going to say the alternatives are easier. You're not going to work much less hard for other things, but you are limited in what you can get out of an RGB image. Now, I'm not disparaging them. They are awesome. I love RGB imaging, but you have an alternative, and it's going to be very appealing for some people. Thank you to Richard Flynn for this great image of the Wizard Nebula. But narrowband imaging uses filters which pass only a small slice of the spectrum, of the visible spectrum. By cutting down that visible spectrum, you're actually cutting out light pollution. So that's one of the key factors for why it's so appealing. Most of us image from our backyards. We don't always drive out to dark skies, and narrowband lets you do that and get awesome images. That reveals structure of nebula by providing contrast. narrowband typically is for nebula. There are you would use an H-alpha filter in some galaxies, but remember you're shooting the H-alpha nebulae within that galaxy. So narrowband is hitting the most common, H-alpha being the most common. Narrowband would be hitting that particular slice, and you're going to see it in a lot of different spots. But starlight from distant galaxies, not so much. With narrowband, the processor gets to pick which colors get assigned to each filter. So I believe what you're looking at with Richard Flynn's image here is an SHO or a Hubble palette image, but there are alternates to that, HOS. In fact, you can get creative with this, and sometimes when people get really creative, you get some awesome images. When I started imaging a few years ago, kind of before I got into astrophotography really well, and well before I was into narrowband, I saw a lot of Hubble palette images, and I thought they were great, but I always was kind of always preferred RGB. And then when I got more into it, I started to like what the narrowband filters could do. And then I started seeing people do really creative treatments of narrowband where they would map the H-alpha to blue, and you would have this blue dust floating in there. You can get very creative. It's just the limits of your creativity. As I said, it's resistant to light pollution. Now, here is your warning on narrowband. It requires long exposures, but the benefit is it gives a high signal-to-noise ratio. Think about it this way. If you're taking a 5-minute exposure, you're going to get 5 minutes worth of data, a little bit of light pollution, and a bit of noise. The noise you're going to be able to calibrate out well, but with narrowband, and if you're taking 20-minute exposures, you're getting 20 minutes of data without much light pollution because it's cutting it all out. You're getting really strong signal-to-noise ratio. You're getting lots of contrast. You're getting lots of detail. Real big benefit to narrowband, and when we're talking about color, it is a really good way to get dramatic, colorful images. This is, again, part of the backstory, and I'm not going to even try and explain what all these spectral classes mean, but for the quick rundown, stars come in different colors. Their colors depend, for the most part, on their temperature, on their surface temperature. When we photograph the sky, it's nice to accurately have an accurate distribution of the colors of the stars. So that's one really important aspect of what we do, and when it comes to color, that's one of the things you always want to have in mind as you're determining your methodology for color calibration. As you can see there, Spectral Class G, that's our sun, and they call it a G2b star. There are a lot of stars out there just like our sun. And if you take an image, you're very likely to capture one of those, and that's something kind of important. But at the same time, you're going to see very red stars, you're going to see very blue stars. And I'll tell you, when I do my imaging, I'm not so impressed with the white stars. I'm not so impressed with even the yellow stars so much. I like seeing those brown stars and those blue stars kind of sitting off each other, giving depth. And so that's where it really gets important, paying attention to the color of your stars. But that's all I'm going to say about that, because there's a few other things that really come into it. One more of the backstories. Human perception. What we see may not be the true color. So those stars that I showed you, that distribution of stars, that is, well, before I even say that, what we see may not be the true color. The eye is most sensitive to green. So we are going to shift the true colors from what they actually are. Our eyes tell us what we think the colors are. We have spectrometers to actually measure what the wavelength of it is, and we can tell the intensity of it as well by really the brightness levels, or how bright it gets. But much of the spectrum cannot be seen, and a lot of the times we might, in some cases, want to show colors brighter if they're colors that we can't necessarily see so well. And I hope that made sense. But here we are, color calibration. I didn't know whether to include this image in here, but I love this photograph. You all know the battle that's going on Mauna Kea over the telescope. They're protesting, and it's unfortunate. It's a beautiful place to go, but I like telescopes as well. And if I went to Mauna Kea again, then I would bring my telescope. But it's to the image is really just to demonstrate the battle that's going on, because people really take sides in this, and I've seen some strong opinions on both sides of this of the color calibration issue. There are two main types of color calibration. There's actually more, but there are two main types: G2V versus PicsInsight, and they both rely on different philosophies. And the one that I have never done G2V calibration myself. I know you can use Excalibur, and I know you can do it in PicsInsight. You can map the stars to specific colors. But I'm going to go through some generalities here, and if there's some people in the room that have done G2V calibration, I'd love if they'd chime in, whether it's now or at the end of the conversation. Probably the end of the conversation, because I have a group of open questions that includes it. But I'm going to go right into it. G2V, our sun is the reference. For those of you that have done terrestrial photography with the DSLR, probably if you tried doing terrestrial photography with a modified DSLR, which in this group I probably find a few, you know, we use a white card or a gray card to color balance. So you shoot a white card, you use AV mode so you're not, or a gray card is actually a little bit better. You shoot in AV mode so you're not overexposing or underexposing. Make sure it's in focus, and it tells your camera what the neutral light would be under the lighting scenario that you're in. Great, that makes it easy. And I'll say this: if you have not done that, whether it be for, actually I'm going to say more for terrestrial photography, if you've not done that, try it, because it is amazing how well it's amazing how well it improves your color. Give it a try. We're not talking about terrestrial here. So why not use a white card on the ground with your telescope? Well, here's the problem. The atmosphere shifts and disperses the light. It actually shifts it considerably. They call it atmospheric extinction. It's the reason the sky is blue. So you do get some shifting, and it's good if you can take into account that. And there's a good way to take it into account. You just need to put your gray card in space. Well, you need a really big gray card, and it needs to reflect the sun's light. So maybe that's not so practical, is it? Well, wait a minute. There is a big gray card in space. All we have to do, there is a big gray card in space that's the same color as our sun. All we have to do is find a star that's similar to our sun and use that to calibrate off of. And if you are into this calibration method, you get lists of stars that fit that, and you can use that star to actually color calibrate. What happens is you photograph that same star in a few different situations, and it ends up giving you offsetting values for your exposure lengths, or offsetting values that you can apply to your images of the same exposure. And it does a great job of giving an accurate color if you think that the sun must be the reference. And that's where the distinction is. PicsInsight has a different idea of this. And I won't tell you my opinion yet, but PicsInsight says, why use our star as a reference? What's the point? Is our starlight going to be reflecting off those stars? No, most likely not. PicsInsight says what you want to do is you want to use a galaxy or all the stars in the image to find a white balance. This does a few things. Well, let me first say, the way that I like to think of this is PicsInsight thinks their gray card should be in space, but not reflecting the sunlight. it should be reflecting the light of the stars within the image that you're photographing. And so PicsInsight method uses a galaxy or all the stars in the image to find a white balance. And what they say about that is it doesn't treat our sun in any special way. And as astronomers, we like doing that. We don't like to say, well, we're in a special place in the universe. Every star is just as, it has just as, well, whatever I'm saying. I don't even know what I was going with there. But either way, the stars can have a distribution of color that isn't necessarily accurate in relation to our sun, as long as the distribution of colors is based on something specific. And like I said, here the distribution of colors is based on the average of the starlight that's coming out of all of the stars. You can choose in PicsInsight between using stars or the galaxy. Some galaxies may be better candidates for this than others. Some galaxies may be younger, some galaxies might have more of a specific spectral type. If you're doing a wide field image, you probably have a great distribution of stars, and that's probably a good way to do it. If you're doing a tight image of a particular nebula, you might find that all of those stars are of the same spectral class, and if you use the PicsInsight method on it, it might exaggerate the differences in the stars. So keep that in mind. Here's my opinion, and I think it's just a bit of the logic behind PicsInsight and the reason it works. The PicsInsight method gives a better variety of color and richer stars. Whether it's the more accurate, I think, is up for argument. It depends on what you consider accurate, but I just like the distribution of star color. And I'm going to go back to this larger image because I do my color calibration in PicsInsight, and you can see I've got a nice distribution of blue and gold stars. And I've heard people talk about the PicsInsight look, and this is always, star color is always the first thing that I think of when I think of the PicsInsight look. People probably have different definitions for that, but that's so what are the things in our images? Stars, nebulae, background. These are the things we have to work with stars: saturation reduction, nebulae, saturation, background, desaturation, or chromatic noise reduction. For me, I have a few star-based techniques when it comes to objects. Globular clusters, I like heavier star saturation. Galaxies, I like mild star saturation. Star reduction in many cases. Depends on how big the galaxy is, but that's kind of a generality. Emission nebula, I like mild star saturation. I don't want the stars to take away from the nebula, and sometimes I'll even reduce them. Dark and reflection nebula, well, you saw what I did with that one earlier. Heavier saturation with the stars and some reduction. I actually, with dark and reflection nebula, I love seeing the blues. I love just pushing the blues, saturating the blues more and more. It's different for every type of object. Planetary nebula, some star saturation. It kind of depends on the planetary, but I want to see if the planetary has O3, I want to see that. I'm disappointed in this current Vandenberg 152 image because as I was doing my processing with the H-alpha and pushing everything, I just lost the green, that greenish blue that would be in the planetary, and that's the one disappointment I have in this image. I frequently say the blue channel can be the most important channel you're shooting because the stronger it is, I want to say the more rich it is. It also seems to be one of the most impacted by light pollution, but the darker skies I go to, the better my blues are. That's been one of my observations. Object-based techniques, globs, process to resolve core stars, galaxies, attempt to have a variety of blues and reds. I like to show off the H-alpha regions, but I do like the bands to be blue. Definitely depends on the galaxies, but that tends to be just the case. Emission nebula, appealing reds while maintaining contrast. People talk about salmons or pinks. When you hit it, you hit it. I don't always hit it right, but I always feel like I'm moving one of my sliders, one of my color sliders, and then all of a sudden it pops, and that's where I am. I already said it, dark and reflection nebula, strong blue saturation. Stars provide the most color. And planetary nebula, they tend to be fairly bright and give strong colors on their own. So they're just dramatic objects on their own. You want to give them the fair color treatment. Background should be neutral with little visible chromatic noise. And I've been struggling with chromatic noise recently, and I guess it's just that I'm always pushing it a little bit further, but it's really difficult. So you do what you can, and you use noise reduction. You try and keep the noise reduction on the background. Should make the object stand out, not get washed out. And my current Vandenberg is a bit of a out there target because there's a lot of dark dust in it that prevents the object from standing out too much, but it also gives it kind of a dirty look, is the word that I used earlier. And that dirty look is just, I don't know, I kind of like it. You know, we want our images to look pretty. I said pretty pictures before. Well, sometimes you can take a great picture of a pig in the mud, and that's the way I look at it here. There's some targets that are just photogenic on their own, and this is one of them. It doesn't matter whether it's in a dirty region. So backgrounds, you don't want them to appear too black. You don't want them clipped, not too dark. Darkness of the background tends to depend on the image. It may favor blue for some targets. If you're using Photoshop, you can do, and you're using your sample points, you can do a 30-30-30, or you can aim for 30-30-30, and that seems to be where I aim for. You're never going to nail it. You're going to be up by 5, 7, down by 3, 4, and 1. You might prefer to shoot the blue up just a little bit or bring the others back down, but it's a good starting point, or it's a good aiming spot. And a good background is going to accent the nebula rather than detracting. I don't have the opportunities to go to dark skies. My dark skies are on the border of an orange and yellow zone, and I shoot over a lake where there's lots of cottages. So I have shields up to block the local light pollution, but I'm not in the best location. But when you go to dark skies, you really get these beautiful backgrounds that kind of shimmer. Some of it's processing, but some of it's just dark skies, low noise, and the stacking does its job. I've said it before, light pollution noise is very difficult. Very difficult to get rid of, and that's really what kills backgrounds. Josh, thank you for this image. I don't think you knew I was using it yet. I forgot to mention it to you. But this is just a great image to show what kind of colors are in the sky up there. And I'm just quickly looking at it. There's narrowband up here, there's RGB up here, and every color. It's just a beautiful presentation of all the colors that are just in nature. And I think it just represents the point well. Color can do so much. It's great to have it in one image, but look at it presented this way in this nice collage. And this is one of the things. I just included this slide because this is I'm not even going to call it a pet peeve, but this is a bone of contention that I have. Light versus paint. And it is almost completely unrelated. In fact, I don't even think I intended to leave those bottom things in there. But light versus paint. So I say this all the time. I say black is the absence of all color. And I say it in public, and I'm talking to my friends, and they say, no, if you mix all colors together, you get white. Or if you mix all colors together, you get black. And I say, no, that's if you mix paint together, or if you're using crayons. But with light, if there's no light, it's black. There's no color. When you have all the colors present, that's when you get white. So that's why you are getting the average to white, and that's pretty much where I was going with that. Like I said, I don't know why those bottom things are still in there. I've been back and forth from work working on this presentation, and I've been saving it on Google Drive, and maybe I just left it in there, but let me read them anyway, because maybe I'll remember where I was going with it. Space itself doesn't give off much visible light. I guess that goes in. Okay, okay, yeah. So space itself doesn't give off much visible light, so that's why our backgrounds tend to be close to black. Something I did notice, which I found interesting, is that as I was processing my these dark nebula, they gave off a little bit more light in H-alpha than I was expecting. And I come to read that they do give off a little bit of H-alpha light. They do glow in that wavelength, just a little bit. And it's always interesting to read some science and then figure it out with your telescope. It's also interesting to figure it out with your telescope and then read some science about it. Hydrogen is the most common element and most frequently gives off light in H-alpha. It is the red glow. There's lots of it up there. If you're thinking about your narrowband filter, H-alpha is the one to start with. You're going to have lots of good targets. I think I mentioned this earlier. Galaxies tend to sum to white. Not always. There are specific galaxies that you can look at that will sum to white for the most part. There are others that won't. If you're going the PI method, then and you really want accurate color calibration, that's one thing to keep in mind. You can get the list of galaxies that do. And I am right now going to open it up for discussion. I didn't really intend for this to be a long presentation. Good, it wasn't. But I'd love to just get your thoughts on G2V. First of all, if anybody does G2V calibration, if anybody prefers G2V calibration over PicsInsight's calibration methods, I'd love to hear your reasoning. I'm going to come up with I'm going to read them all off and then I'll open it up for conversation. Heavy saturation versus light saturation. I find with better data, I'm moving towards heavier saturation, bordering on the garish look, but I just kind of like it. And I think it goes, and maybe it's the culmination of this presentation, because I think that you can do so much more with color and by pushing it a little bit further. And my question going beyond that is, what opportunity does color provide us? Do you guys see color as important as me? Now, I'm like you guys. I like seeing a beautiful H-alpha, but what does everybody ask when you post that awesome H-alpha image? Oh, what are your plans with that? Because everyone wants to see it colorized, and it's not just the friends, it's not just the family, it's not just the coworkers. It's the people on cloudy nights too. So. Similarities between and I forgot one of my slides that I forgot to get up here. Similarities between astrophotography and terrestrial photography or color theory. If you've been on with us for a while, Mike Miller was giving us a quick thing a while back, and he showed us a color wheel with a black to gray or a black to white gradation scale and a color wheel on it. And I believe that at the time, I think he uses it just to kind of see any color bias. But I also think that when you're staring at an image for a long, long time, you just start to become numb to a specific color, especially if it's favoring a specific color. And I wonder whether having an actual color wheel on our screen that we can click to kind of neutralize our vision. Because remember, it's about our vision and the way we're interpreting it, and that can be tainted by looking at the computer screen for too long. I know that happens to me. Would a little thing like that be handy? And that's where I'm going with that software reference for image for tweaking color. I'm going to pull that up as I open it up for discussion. But right now, that's pretty much the end of the presentation. So let me open it up for discussion right now. Anybody first? Let me check. I'm gonna read off. I'm going to check for comments. No comments. Open it up for discussion.
There's a question over in the from the YouTube listeners. And by the way, if anybody's new to the group here, be sure to type either into the Q&A over in YouTube or into the question section if you happen to be in the room. But Walter Glokowski says, do you perform monitor color calibration before you process your images? And he says that he's been disappointed when he gets a print made of some of his images because they don't match what they see on his monitor. Would you like to address some comments to that, or maybe some of the other people that are in the room could address something?
Absolutely. And my apologies for actually not getting into monitor calibration or anything like that, but I don't. calibrate my monitor. And I know a lot of people here doing it. Probably a better practice to calibrate your monitor with hardware calibration. I basically use software calibration. So I pull up, you can probably Google color monitor software calibration, and it shows you the scale, the gradations, and it does that. I have been working on proofing it in Photoshop, and I am not the best one to speak about it because every time I think I figure it out, I do what I think is going to work, and it doesn't quite work. But more importantly, with prints, you can, in some ways, you can color calibrate your monitor, and that'll help you. But in some ways, it does come down to the quality of the printer. I've seen big differences between the quality of printers, and my best suggestion is to print off a few sample images, send them to your printer, keep them on your computer, hold them up to your computer. And I was just looking up here because there's a particular print house that a lot of professional photographers use, and I gave them a shot, and I was actually planning on buying a metal print from them, and when I went to buy it, they didn't have the particular size I wanted, but I was so impressed with what they did that I feel like I have to give them business. I signed up. They don't show you prices till you sign up. I signed up, and they asked me for 5 of my images. I sent them 5 of my images, and they printed them and overnighted them to me for free. And they want me to hold the images up to my monitor and if we need to shift or color calibrate my monitor, they have further steps to go through. They came out pretty well. When I use Adorama, it comes out pretty well. And I wish MPix Pro is the place. I don't want you to just, first of all, don't just print the images for the 6 free images or 6 free photographs because the stock they printed on isn't necessarily the stuff you're going to want to frame it in. It's a matte stock, which was okay. They actually send you a sampling of their stock. Pretty impressive kit I got. I got to give them business because it's pretty impressive. But so that's really the best thing you can do. Now, last week we were chatting with Eric in the room, and he actually has a printer. It's an Epson that he says prints better than most of his professional printers. And I'm tempted to give something like that a try. His is a wider format printer. Typically they only print what 8.5 wide, but that's another option because then you can get immediate feedback. But I do know a few people color calibrate with hardware calibration, and that's probably the best way to go if you want it to look the same. But I'll also say this: my monitor at work, no matter what I do, all the images that I process on it look awful. So I try not to share those images.
Can I just add something with the printing topic as well? When you print anything from a computer to print, everything goes darker as well. And when you're working with Astro images, we're working with fields that are almost close to black in the first place. So a lot of the faint detail that we try and pull out in our Astro images suddenly just disappears as soon as you go to print. So before you go to print, I would suggest just increasing the luminance of your image just a touch, almost so that it's a little bit garish on the monitor, and do some test prints if you can before you start forking out money for big expensive prints. Get them to do little A5 prints or just small postcard size ones, so you can just test the image before you go into the big one. Another little thing that I found was I went to a commercial printer, and I got some of my photos printed on transparency, which kind of speaks to what Adam was saying before about paint versus light. When printers are using inks, if they mix all their inks together, they're going to get black. But on the screen, when we mix together, we get white. And so by printing to transparency, I've ended up with these prints that I can hold up to the sun, to our own star, and our star shines through them, and they look fantastic. I can't actually show you because they do have some reflection anyway, but if you hold them up to the sun behind, it's absolutely amazing. I'd thoroughly recommend it.
That's really cool.
Adam,
I was just looking
can I add a little I just want to kind of reinforce what Dylan just said. I have the Epson 3880 print, and you can never get what you can see on a monitor on the print. But you're right, Dylan. What you have to do is you have to go and put another layer in Photoshop and actually, you know, raise it up so that the print you get out of the Epson is as approximately bright as you're going to get on the screen. But you can never get a reflection image to be the equivalent to a transmission image, whether it's a transparency or whether it's your monitor. So basically what I end up with is a whole deck of 4x6 prints where I do test prints until I've gotten as close as I can without washing out the image. And that usually means it just lightening up the image slightly, so I don't want it on the monitor, but it matches what I want to get out of the reflection print.
I'd like to comment a little bit about monitoring. I think Walter's dead on in that he looks at it on his monitor and he sees such and so, and then he takes it to a printer, or he sends it to somebody else's monitor, and they look at it and they don't see the brilliance of Walter's Astro imaging skills, and that's a shame. One of the things that we do, Adam has talked about how he calibrates his pictures to a certain standard, either PIs or G25, so he's got them calibrated. But I bet you Adam also looks at it afterwards and says, you know what, I want a little more red, or I want it a little brighter, or a little darker, or something like that. And he goes and makes a little tweak here and there. That's all very good if his monitor is accurate. However, maybe his monitor is a particularly dark monitor, gloomy monitor, and so he really has to boost it up in order to bring out those things that he's looking for. And then he sends it over to somebody else's monitor who is a bright, happy, cheerful monitor, and it's way overblown. That's why it's important for us all to calibrate our monitors. You can do it with software in various places. I think Photoshop has a little way to do that, and basically you make sure that you'll get 16 blocks of grays, and you got to adjust your brightness so that you can see all 16 blocks. If your monitor is too dark, well, your 3 or 4 black boxes will be all kind of mooshed together into one blackness, or if it's too bright, your 3 or 4 whiter boxes will be mooshed together into one white box. You've got to adjust it in such a way that your contrast is such that you've got, in fact, 16 boxes. And you've got to balance off your color in the same way. So that you can do with software. You can also do it, I think many people do it with Spider. I do mine occasionally with my Spider, and it actually reads what the color is coming off your monitor, and then through a series of tests it sends a certain signal to your monitor, reads what the monitor is telling it, and then it makes what's called a color profile for your monitor. And every time from that point on, when you load your computer up, it loads a particular color profile into your monitor so that it looks the way it is supposed to look. And it is supposed to, if everybody does that, and everybody has modified their color profile such that they're getting the proper balance and everything else like that, then everybody's going to get the same picture no matter which monitor they're looking at, or as well as possible. Now, the difference that Walter was talking about, he goes on to about printing. Printers also have color mono profiles, and you can actually find out what your printer profile is, and it tells you what the range of colors it can handle, how bright it can get, how dark it can get. And over in any one of a number of programs, you can tell your printing program to put out to a certain profile. One of the places that a lot of people go to get their Astro images printed is Costco. And one of the reasons is because you can go and get an actual color profile for the printer you're going to use. And you can tell it that I want to use that particular profile. It'll know what to do in order to translate what was happening on your screen directly into that, into the profile that's used at the Costco printer, that particular Costco printer. Okay, I mean maybe that Epson that is particularly good, and that's why. But it may be that Epson just happens to be using a color profile that matches the color profile of the monitor, and that's why it's matching it so much, not necessarily printing anything better or worse. So. Walter, that's my answer to your question, and as you can see, you've had 4 different people answer these questions, and there is some consistency among us, but there is a lot of differences between what we said here. Okay?
Thanks, Alex, Dylan, and Eric. Eric, would you give us the model number of your printer again? I don't know if you got his answer, but...
It's an Epson 3880. It comes in different flavors. There's a Pro and an Extra Pro and a Special Extra Pro. But I just got the plain old 3880. The one thing to consider, you get the inks with it. They'll last a long time, but when you have to replace it, they aren't cheap.
Yep. If you want good quality, it doesn't come cheap. Let me see. I'm just going to pull up my list of questions here, which are on my different window. Any comments on the G2V versus PicsInsight? Who has used G2V, or who uses G2V calibration?
Adam, I use Excalibur usually.
And you use it frequently, don't you?
Yes, I use it for every picture.
Every picture.
I'm with Josh.
Python, yeah.
Yeah,
See,
I use Excalibur as well. On the latest images, I just started moving to it. I just found it to be a little bit nicer and cleaner than PicsInsight, but that is just my own personal opinion.
Me too, especially when I use that Sony chip, because when I use the 8300, it's fairly accurate off the bat, and I don't have to tweak it much. But when I use that Sony chip, it needs a good bit of moving around. But I just use it for all the pictures because I think it gives those good star colors right off the bat, and so the rest of the data kind of follows up nicely.
There's a few more steps that are involved with Excalibur than there are typically with PicsInsight. With PicsInsight, as Adam had stated, you can either select destructor detection or you can select a white reference in the background, or sorry, from a background galaxy in order to calculate. But with Excalibur, it just works slightly differently. It's you have to separate your images into red, green, and blue, plate solve them, then import them into Excalibur itself, where then it just pulls the information down from, remind me, SDSS and Nomad plates. I think that's correct, looking for any white references, and then it does the calibration based on that. And then you would take those values, input it into, say, your LRGB combination, and voila, color image.
And how do you find the distribution differences between the two, the star color distribution? Do you find one favors one hue or another?
The only problems I have are sometimes whenever you have a lot of data that's from very low in the sky, and then I always forget which way it goes. I think when it's lower in the sky, it seems like it favors the red stars more, and the blue stars show up a little bit whiter. And then the opposite, if you get the blue all high in the sky, then it might favor them a tiny bit, but it's a little bit susceptible to if you're not shooting them high in the sky.
Okay. Interesting.
I used G25 a long time ago, but it was more work than it really was needed, finding just which star was which and things like that. I generally go with PicsInsight's color calibration routine. And then, like I said earlier when I was teasing you, Adam, I go ahead and make it look pretty after that.
Yep.
Adam, I have a comment on the color saturation thing.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that you didn't mention, maybe it's just a kind of a small thing, but in processing, we've always discussed when to actually saturate the color. And I think it was Mad Ratter maybe a year ago did a presentation on how he likes to do his color saturation before he does much stretching, and to me that was probably the biggest jump that I made in my processing, was learning to do that before stretching the image. A lot of times, if you try to get a lot of color in your stars by saturating after stretching, it's tough to get much out of it. And when I learned to kind of increase the saturation a little before stretching, I ended up getting much more color in my stars and more color in my nebulosity later on.
I don't remember. Do you go ahead and use a screen transfer function first to see what you're saturating, or what?
I typically actually do my color saturation in Photoshop, so I will do a screen transfer function to look at what's there, but then I'll bring it over into Photoshop and I will do a little bit of just a little bit of stretching, and then I'll do a match color and screen the match color to only increase the saturation and what's visible on that layer. And so I do a little bit of stretching at a time and increase the saturation on each stretch for the first 4 or 5 stretches before I go nonlinear.
Yeah, I tend to do my I do saturation immediately after color calibration, just to get a little, I'm not going to say a little bit of color into there, but enough color that I know I'm going to have something to work with. And then I would say star color is probably one of my final steps, where I then try and bring my stars to kind of just that final point. And recently I've been pushing them further and further and saturating them more and more just to kind of get that color out of them. And it may not be for everybody, but it's the look I've been favoring.
Yeah, I tend to find Photoshop to be far more superior than, say, PicsInsight when it comes to its color capabilities. I know that might offend a lot of the PicsInsight people there, but again, it's just a personal opinion. I find Photoshop is a little bit more advanced, and the tools, what I particularly like about Photoshop when it comes to color, I'm working on a big image of VDB 149 right now here in front of me, and one of the things that I have found is the ability to manipulate the shadows of the image itself in order to increase the amount of color saturation. I total guess, found it by mistake, and found that to work actually quite well. What I particularly like even more is the fact that you can keep your luminosity and your RGB blends separate between the two, or at least separated. You don't have to combine them or flatten the layers together immediately like you traditionally would in PicsInsight. And you can work on the two layers independently. So you could raise the black point, say, of the RGB image below the luminosity in order to increase the saturation. But then in a separate layer, say on the luminosity layer within Photoshop, you can adjust the black point just to modify the contrast of the image itself, but also to modify, say, the illumination profile of the individual objects, so that way you're not saturating them to the point where they're so white that the underlying RGB color cannot properly, say, colorize the pixels that are above in the luminosity layer. That is something I've been just playing with and trying out, and I'm just finding that Photoshop, it's funny because I'm regressing in the opposite direction, where I do calibration in CCD stack for the first step, then PicsInsight, and then color combination into Photoshop, or I finish the image in Photoshop.
Interesting. That was a bit heavy saturation versus light saturation. I don't know if anyone has any further comments on that. What opportunity does color provide us? If anyone wants to comment on that, they're welcome to.
I would say two things about both those issues. One is, if you can harken back to the 5 C's, one of the things I was talking about was you got to tell a story when you're with your images. You're trying to make a point with your images, and you've got to decide what that point is. If the point is, look, that the world is colorful out there, you really can use that saturation a lot. But if you're trying to make, if you got a peaceful scene, that may not be saturation land. You may not want to do it that way. So you've got to figure out what the point is that you're trying to make with the image, what point you're getting across, and use the color to support that. I also, secondarily, want to go back to a presentation I heard by Deborah Saravallo, 100 years ago or so, maybe 6 or 8 years ago, where she was trying to get people to think it out, what they're really doing. That we're really getting too many things oversaturated here. That the colors that we're putting out are getting a little too strong to the point that they are becoming the focus of the image rather than the objects being the focus of the image. And what you call it, food or something like food and astroimaging or something like that was the theme she was going at. And you know, every season is applied for a reason when you're cooking. And color saturation should be applied for a reason. Yeah, those of you who like hot sauce, I certainly don't agree with you, but I know that some of you just like dumping that old El Paso hot sauce on there and just making it as hot as possible. And certainly if you look at a Del Taco ad, that's the thing you want. But man, it really ruins food. And I think the same thing can be said for saturation. I'm muting myself now.
I think that was excellent, and that's kind of a theme I've seen is, you know, the more popular images, people seem to be drawn more towards the color than the objects, and a lot of the award-winning images are just radically saturated, and I think a lot of times you kind of start losing structure and detail and things like that when you push the colors so far.
Interesting. Thanks, John.
I'll add something too to that. I think that you said, what can it do for you? I think it gives you the opportunity, not just to make it super saturated, but gives you the opportunity to present your image differently than everyone else in the world. I mean, there's thousands of pictures taken of almost every object. I know we like to try and shoot for the ones that are a little more rarely targeted, but even with those, you know, if you truly just stick to the perfect exact colors, then they're going to end up looking like everyone else's, maybe a little cleaner or a little less clean. But especially when you get into narrowband imaging, you just have the opportunity to be more of an artist, which you don't if you try to just kind of flatline it, which is fine too. There's nothing at all wrong with doing that. But if you're looking to present something a little more original or be more of an artist, then certainly colors and narrowband give you that opportunity. And even in RGB, as you see with R2 renditions of VDB 152, I mean, you can do a lot even in just RGB images.
Yeah, I agree with everything that everyone has just said. Also, I think something that we're touching on here is that when we show our images to the general public, they look at them completely different to how we look at them. And a lot of them really love those colors. And some of the comments I get back is just, wow, I didn't know there was so much color out there. As astrophotographers, we're looking at our images way differently to what we used to, and we want to see those orangey stars versus the blue stars. And I know with some of the astrophotography awards here, the judges will actually judge your image based on how honestly they're portraying the stars and the objects, and the guys judging them know, David Malin particularly, he knows what those objects are coloured like naturally, and if he sees you push them too far in one direction, you'll just be disqualified from the judging process. But definitely the general public, if you're making images to impress people, push them hard. But definitely as astrophotographers, we have this kind of tendency to do things a certain way.
Well, you'll notice the reference at several points in this conversation. People say, you know how those APODs on those award-winning images all have that oversaturated effect. Well, how did they get to be award-winning images if they were oversaturated, and oversaturated isn't all that good? Obviously, there's a disconnect.
Well,
the APOD images get awards for various reasons. Saturation is only one of them.
I would absolutely agree with that. Yeah, I wouldn't say saturation is the only factor.
It's nice if you have the right last name.
I think quality of data allows you to tastefully saturate further as well. You know, saturation isn't a replacement for detail. That's kind of the one thing that we're all kind of saying, is saturation gives drama, but it doesn't replace detail. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Too much saturation, to John's earlier point, will absolutely drown out all detail within the object itself, and it just takes away from it. It's the same way that noise reduction, right? It's called noise reduction, not noise extinction.
Right.
Yeah, or elimination. It's just a matter of, but everyone has a different eye, and there are different things that appeal to different people. You know, now we're starting to move into, and I'm kind of taking the conversation in a bit of a different direction by mentioning noise reduction. It's some people love a completely smooth image, and then the next individual look at it and go, no, I'd like a little bit of a Gaussian, you know, noise distribution in the background of my image. It's just totally dependent upon the individual.
I kind of call this, you know, I do daytime photography as well, and I spend a lot of time looking at landscape photography. And I kind of call this the age of saturation because it's the same trends with landscape photography. You know, you came out of the large format film age, and you had very realistic color, and there was saturation, but it wasn't the vibrancy we have today. And then today, with digital cameras and everything, and the ease of getting thousands of people to look at your images every day, this surrealistic saturation just seems to be a theme as far as who's going to appreciate it most when they're looking at your image. And a lot of those people are not going to be astrophotographers. They're going to be, you know, potential customers, I guess, is the one way of putting it. And they do like saturation, it seems.
You know, I'm glad you said that, John. Potential customers, because I look at, I do some outreach, and I like doing outreach. But one thing that I always think about is I'm doing outreach with my photography. I'm not keeping it to myself, and I'm not just showing it to other astrophotographers. I show my photographs to everyone out there, and I think that that's one of those things where when I show my photograph to someone and they notice it because of the color, and they're like, "Wow, that's amazing." That's one of the really impressive things. And what I like even more is when they look at it and they say, "Oh, the stars are different colors. Are those different types of stars?" There are other things they can take from it, where if it's represented well but also presented well, but first catches their eye, then we're almost doing our job as astrophotographers, our outreach job as astronomers, with it itself. And I'll tell you, it's not work. It's fun. I love taking images and I love sharing them. So. And yeah, you actually jumped into similarities between astrophotography and terrestrial photography or color theory, and then yeah, software reference for software reference image for tweaking color. What do you guys think about that? Do you guys get numb to color where you almost need to look at some neutral something? Would there be a color wheel or a gradation of blacks that helps us do that or almost keeps next to our image?
I think that if you continue working on an object over and over again, that you will not get what you want out of it. How many of us have come back to a project that we've left for a month and look at it and go, what was I thinking? And what's the explanation for that? I'm not sure it's a physiological thing, that your eye has become dulled to certain colors. It may be. But I just think that you just lose track of what you're doing. You're concentrating so hard on something, you lose track of what you're concentrating on sometimes. And yeah, you do need to clear the palate every now and then when you're tasting wine, and you do need to go away from the project every now and then when you're processing.
Well, there's a practical physiological effect in looking at color images too long, in that you saturate your cones. Now that only takes you, all you have to do is just look away for a few seconds and they'll come back. But you can illustrate that effect by just overlaying a grayscale image on your color image and then blink onto the grayscale image, and all of a sudden you'll have the reverse image, which will fade away in about 3 or 4 seconds. I mean, that's a short-term effect. You keep staring at the same image in the same way and the color will change. But
yeah.
I have another question. Can I change the subject? Because I've been pondering a color question. There seems to be the idea that you have to add RGB stars to narrowband images. And I'm being pushed in that direction. And frankly, I hate it. Because the color scheme on the RGB stars, it upsets my visual palette. I don't like to see them. but somehow I'm getting the argument, well, it's more realistic, whatever that really means, putting color stars on SHO images. Do we have any other thoughts about that?
Eric, I'll comment on it since I always push you in that direction. I think maybe there's a little misunderstanding. I think that when they look the best is when you're doing a natural bicolor, like HA and O3. That's when I like the RGB stars. If you're trying to put them into a Hubble palette or something, I'd rather them just be white personally, or some very subtle hue. But if you're doing a natural kind of red and blue image, I think then they make the image look incredibly different.
I mean, I would agree, but I only do basically I only do the 3-color images. But I mean, there's something about the color of those RGB stars that when I look at them, it just visually upsets me. Am I the only one?
No, I agree. They don't go well with Hubble palette.
It's like, wearing stripes and going one way and dots going the other. And
I completely agree with that, and I agree with the bicolor palette because I've done a lot of bicolor. I don't have my 3rd filter yet, but yeah. Now the nice thing about a bicolor palette is when you do the bicolors, you're pretty close to RGB stars. They're not as shifted as the narrowband tricolor Hubble palette would be, but so when you do, if you do try and color calibrate, sometimes you actually get good results, but definitely more important than that would be just to have good looking stars, not blown out, just kind of, it barely matters what the color is as long as they're good looking.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, I have to go back to what JP has said in his tone mapping. There's no meaning to colored stars in narrowband images.
Just an arbitrary combination of light from their perspective.
I think the way that some of us use narrowband is not necessarily to call it a narrowband image. It's more to make it a RGB image from light pollution, or at least that's the way I've used it typically. So a lot of times I'm not presenting an image as like a narrowband. It's that my HA is my red channel and my O3 is kind of my green and blue channel. So at that point, that's why I like the RGB stars in there, because to me it is a natural color image. It's just the only way that I can collect it from my light pollution.
I also think that something's happened over the last 4 or 5 years. 8 or 10 years ago, narrowband images had weird color stars. And I think we've all learned how to control that a little bit better now so that they come out a little more natural looking.
Well, and isn't a lot of the issue with narrowband stars more just that they don't always necessarily match channel to channel? I mean, if you had matching star profiles from your O3 and your HA or whatever it was, they would blend a lot better. I think you'd end up with more white stars naturally just because of the blend. It seems like a lot of it just more controlling the halos.
Well, I mean, if you're doing tone mapping, you get away from that issue, and there are no halos, and all your stars should be white.
Okay, I gotcha.
Yep, totally agree. That's exactly how I deal with it. I only have HA stars when I have only narrowband stars, and I just desaturate them.
I see.
All right. Anyone else have a
question?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So is it just completely arbitrary when you make the decision that you're going to saturate your image? At what point it becomes oversaturated? You guys judge it on noise? Is it just purely visual? Like if you look at the image, I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but I screen shared an image that I have up in PicsInsight, and I purposefully saturated it really heavily, but I almost kind of think it looks good that saturated, and then I almost think it's too much.
I don't see it on your screen yet.
Yeah, I don't see it either, dude.
You don't. You see it now?
Nope.
Nope.
If you put a link up on the chat, one of us can put it up. But my opinion, to answer your question on that, is that I don't like the saturation to start destroying the details. So I don't mind bumping it up to the point where that starts happening, but then I don't like going any further than that. So I try and look at the sharpest and kind of smallest structured details, and if I start destroying that, then I back off.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I'll push it, but even when I'm pushing it, you kind of know when you go too far, and then you back it off. Usually with saturation, your last saturation step is the back off step. You're kind of like, oh no, that's too far. Maybe one. If I'm realizing now I went too far, maybe I went too far in the last step.
Or typically, I've found that usually my first processing of an image is pretty muted, and then I'll do a super colorful one, and then I'll blend the two together at the end, and it gives me something that's, for whatever reason, ends up better than running one way or the other.
Great. Any other questions?
Well, just one other comment. It might be noted that depending on where you're putting this stuff out, you've got to change what your decisions are. A lot of people will have a nominally final edition saved off someplace, but then when they know that it's going to go into this kind of a publication or that kind of a printing or something like that, they have to tweak it in order to make it look different, to get it prepared for that kind of thing.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. If anyone else has any questions or comments, related or unrelated.
I'd like to have a commercial, if I could have a commercial, because I've got a couple of programs coming up in the next couple of months that people may be interested in. One of them is Dennis Mamana, who is one of the World at Night photographers. He does a wonderful job of stunning landscapes under the nighttime celestial scenes. Is going to be doing a workshop in Southern California at the Riverside Astronomical Society's imaging area, GMARS. If you're in Southern California, you probably know about that already. If not, you go to rivastro.org, rivastro.org, O-R-G, and you will find an advertisement for that. You'll also see a link to nightfallstarparty.com. Nightfall Star Party this year will be having a presentation by Rogelio Bernal Andreo, who will be doing an all-day workshop that if you're at all into PicsInsight or want to meet Rogelio and stuff like that, I'm sure you'll enjoy that. So you can find information for that over at rivastro.org. Dennis costs $129, I think, and to get to Nightfall itself is free. It's a star party at a RV resort, so you can get hotel rooms, and if you've got an RV, you can come. And there's also campsites in the area and stuff like that. And then that costs you $60 to spend the day with Rogelio, and that'll be cool if you're into PicsInsight at all. Anyway, all that information for all that stuff's over at rivastro.org, and the more of you that can make it out, the merrier.
Thank you, Alex. As always, I want to remind you guys that if you want to submit for our image of the day, you just go to our Google Plus page and you'll see an image submission thread. Just post your image below and you're in consideration. And if you win, we'll ask you to come on. We won't force you to come on, but we'll ask you to come on. As well, next week we have an idea of what we might be doing, but we don't have it firmed up yet for our presentation, but we'll have something and we'll post it sometime during the week. That is. Sorry, I'm getting feedback. Eric, it's you, I think, so you're muted. There we go. Yeah, we'll see you next week. You'll get that posted midweek. And again, thanks for coming, guys. Have a good one.